p.m. And I would like to welcome everyone to the City of Georgetown's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. At this time, I'd like to ask Myrna Garcia, our staff liaison, to call the roll to establish which commissioners are in attendance this evening. Sophia, is Myrna on?
Yes, ma'am, it is showing her. Hold on just a second. Let me try one more item. Myrna, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Now we can. Yes, thank you.
Sherry Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Here.
Travis Berthews,
Here.
Jay Warren, Doug Noble,
Here.
Chris Stanley, Jim Sawyer,
Here.
Mike Tyland,
Here.
Terry Williams.
Here.
So it looks like we do have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much, Myrna. All right. We have a quorum. I will now call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone to this regularly scheduled P&Z Commission meeting this evening. Commission members are appointed by the mayor and city council for the purpose of reviewing land use applications. For some applications, the commission will be the final authority. For others, notably those items such as zoning and annexation, the commission will act as an advisory body and as such make recommendations to the city council for their final determination. Tonight's meeting is being held as a teleconference. The complete agenda and all supporting documentation for each of the items to be dealt with this evening has been posted to the city's website and is available for public review. In a few minutes, we will hear from Sophia Nelson, the city's planning director, who will walk us through the process of how all parties can participate in this teleconference meeting. The agenda for tonight's meeting is divided into 3 sections: a regular session agenda, a consent agenda, and a legislative regular agenda. As to the consent agenda, any items that the director considers routine and non-controversial, or any items that don't require public hearing, are grouped together and can be decided on by a single motion. That being said, any item on the consent agenda can be moved to the legislative regular agenda for a full presentation and discussion by the commission, by a commissioner, or members of the public. Prior to taking any action on the consent agenda, I will first ask if any commissioners have any items they need to abstain from, or if they have any items they want to be pulled from the consent agenda and moved to the legislative regular agenda. Then I will ask if any member of the public has any items on the consent agenda they would like to have pulled and moved to the legislative agenda. As to the legislative regular agenda, each item listed for action will be discussed and acted on individually. The process we will be following this evening is step 1. I will announce the agenda item and the file number for the item to be considered. Step 2, city staff will begin by reading the caption for the item for the record and then make any presentation to the commission and the public. At the conclusion of the staff presentation, the commission then will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff regarding the item. Step 3, after the commission has completed their questions for staff, the applicant will be given up to 5 minutes to make a presentation to the commission. The commission will then have the opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Step 4, at the conclusion of the applicant's presentation, I will then open the floor to public comments. When it is your turn to address the commission, please begin your comments by stating your name and address for the record. Speakers will have up to 3 minutes to address the commission unless other persons present and sign up to, address the commission is willing to transfer their time, in which case an individual speaker may have up to 6 minutes to address the commission. However, If more than 20 speakers sign up to speak on an agenda item, then by city rules, each speaker is allowed a maximum of 2 minutes to address the commission. If another individual who has signed up to speak and is present at the meeting yields their time to you, then a speaker may have up to a maximum of 4 minutes to address the commission. After everyone who has signed up to address the commission has spoken, the public hearing will be closed. Step 5, the applicant will be provided up to 3 minutes of rebuttal time to respond to the public comments if they so choose. In step 6, discussion of the item moves to the dais and commissioners will engage in the deliberation process with the goal of adopting a formal action on the item. Said, Sophia, do we have anyone signed up this evening to talk?
Not at this point.
Okay. All right. Are there any agenda items that we need to remove from the regular consent agenda item to the legislative agenda item this evening?
Ms. Heitzman, we do have one. We need to remove item AG to the legislative agenda.
All right. And what about item BZ? Do we need to move that to the, from the consent to the legislative agenda as well?
BZ is on the legislative agenda.
It is on the legislative? Okay, thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Ms. Heitzman, did you say BZ, BZ, or BC?
B as in Ben, Z as in zebra.
Just want to clarify.
I just want to make sure that that is moved. Let me just double check. Yes, it has been moved. All right. With that being said,
No, this, 1 minute. This is Tim Haney. I
Hi, Tim.
have 2 items that need to be moved, D and N.
item D and item N.
Correct.
Yep. And this is Travis. I have items J, AG, AJ, AO, AV, BH, BJ on the consent agenda that I need to recuse from.
Okay.
And then BZ on the legislative as well.
Chair, so since we have a couple of consent agenda items that Commissioners Haney and Commissioner Chair Perseus need to recuse, we would like to pull Commissioner Haney and Chair Perseus off the dais for the consent agenda, and we'll pull up one of the alternate commissioners for this vote, and then BZ, that is already on the legislative agenda, and then we also need to pull item AJ and move that to the legislative agenda.
Does that take a motion?
No, we need to pull alternate Commissioner Sawyer up to the dais before we do that. So just to clarify, we will be moving Commissioner Haney and Chair Perseus off the dais. Alternate Commissioner Sawyer will move you up to the dais for this vote. And consent agenda items AG and AJ need to move to the legislative agenda.
Mayor, I apologize. I misspoke. I meant AJ originally instead of AG.
All right. So just to be clear of which items that we are moving from the consent agenda to the legislative agenda, I have Commissioner Haney, you have item D and item N, is that correct?
But those aren't getting pulled. We're just gonna move commissioners off. So it's just item AJ that's coming off of consent and being moved to legislative.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So Myrna or Sophia, is there any other items that need to be moved before we move for a vote?
No, ma'am, not to my understanding.
All right, thank you very much. All right, have we moved Commissioner Sawyer up to the dais to vote?
Mr. Sawyer, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, yes.
All right, do I have a motion for the consent agenda to be approved?
This is Commissioner Salyer. I'll make a recommendation to approve the consent agenda as staff recommendations have been given.
All right, thank you. Do I hear a second?
Commissioner Noble seconds.
All right, thank you. Myrna, would you call roll, please?
Sherry Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Jim Sawyer.
Yes.
So that motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Haney and Chair Perthes abstained.
All right, thank you very much. All right. All right, with that being said, we are moving to the legislative regular agenda. And with that said,
The first item is item AJ, which Chair Perthes is abstaining from. So we'll move Commissioner Haney back on the dais, and we will move alternate Commissioner Sawyer off the dais.
all right, thank you very much. All right, item AJ. All right, consideration and possible action to approve with the conditions set forth in the item an application for a replat consisting of approximately 0.462 acres, being lots 1 and 2. I'm gonna mess this up. Saavedra Subdivision, generally located at 1604 Forest Street, to be known as Saavedra Subdivision 2021-7-FP. Adriana, do you have a presentation, please?
Very sadly, Andrena is no longer with us. But
That's right, I forgot.
You're good. I do sometimes as well. It's all right. No presentation tonight, commissioners. Just a quick note for you. This is a replat of 2 lots off 16th and 4th, just south 16th and 4th Street, just south of our Old Town addition. Y'all previously considered this request several months ago when there was a request to rezone the property. Ultimately, that request was denied by the city council. And so here before you today is a re-subdivision of the property. This is taking 2 lots and creating 3. It meets all of our dimensional standards and technical requirements. At the time of posting, the only remaining requirement that had not been met was to provide fiscal surety for the cost of installing a new water tap for the new lot that's being created here. Since posting, the applicant has been able to provide us that fiscal surety for the cost of that tap. And so we pulled this off the agenda tonight just to ask to change the staff recommendation here from approve with conditions to final approval.
All right, so Ethan, are we asking for a vote from the commissions tonight?
Yes, ma'am. This will require a vote.
All right. Has anyone signed up to talk about this particular item?
No, ma'am, the applicant is here, but I do not think he wishes to say anything.
Okay. All right. Do I have any questions from the commissioners to Ethan pertaining to this item? All right, hearing no questions, would anyone like to put forth a vote on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Motion to approve from Commissioner Haney. Do I have a second?
This is Kayla McCord, second.
Thank you. I have a second from Kayla McCord. Myrna, could you call the roll, please?
Sherry Heinzman,
Yes?
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Doug Noble.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, with that being said, Travis, I believe you are moving up to lead the remainder of the items on the legislative agenda. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Thank you for taking care of that.
No problem.
Had a list of those tonight. Okay, so our next item is it's our first originally regularly scheduled legislative item, which is item BY, which is a subdivision variance. Let's see, Mr. Monk presenting this item, or?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Wesley Wright. I'm your engineering director. David Monk is on the line and will be available for questions, but I'd like to start off this item and present it to the commission if that's okay.
Yep, go for it.
Thank you. I'm going to share an exhibit here just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at. The area in question is a road that really doesn't exist right now. It's really short dead end street called Aviation Drive. It's right across from the airport. It is between Airport Road and I-35 north of Lakeway. We have entered into a partnership agreement and an economic development incentive agreement with a development group called Titan Development, and they are developing a lot of industrial sites in this area. And part of that economic development incentive agreement is for the construction, the extension of Aviation Drive from its current dead end all the way out to the I-35 service road. So it would provide a connection to the sites that are being developed, and it would also provide a through connection, a minor arterial between Airport Road and I-35. It is classified as a minor arterial on our overall transportation plan and in the UDC. There is a requirement in the code to construct bike lanes on major and minor arterials, either a 5-foot bike lane going in each direction or a 10-foot off-street shared use path. The applicant is essentially asking for a variance from that requirement, the bike lane. They didn't specifically request a variance from the shared use path, but the shared use path is it's an alternative design that is allowed and considered, but their request is to not require bikes. And I'm going to run through the approval criteria for a zoning map request or for a zoning map variance request. And I'll try to address each one as I can. I don't know if the applicant's on. I'm trying to look and see. I don't know if they're on, but we can give them a chance to talk also. But would eliminating bike lanes, item A, that granting of the variance eliminating bike lanes would not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or injurious to other property in the area, or to the city in administering this code. That to the applicant's credit, their primary concern is safety. And they want to protect bicyclists, and they don't want bicyclists mixing with trucks. And I generally share that sentiment. I don't think bikes and trucks need to be mixing, but I think eliminating the bike lane, eliminating a safe place and a designated place for bikes to be and trucks not to be, creates a more unsafe situation. Granting this variance would not prohibit bicycles from using this road. What it would do would be, it would eliminate either a shared use path or an on-street striped bike lane for bikes to use. The next criteria, there are 5 criteria that are supposed to be considered for these type of variance requests. The granting the variance, eliminating bike lanes would not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan and the purpose of this code. Staff doesn't feel this complies either. And I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on the first item. As far as health and safety, staff doesn't feel that the request complies for the reasons I stated. Granting the variance would not substantially conflict with the comprehensive code. We don't feel this complies either. The comprehensive code, the UDC is very clear on bike lanes. It gives alternate, the shared use path is an alternate means of meeting that requirement. And it also gives staff a little bit of discretion as far as lane widths and bike lane widths and on-street parking and off-street parking requirements. There is a little bit of flexibility there. Additionally, with the 2015 road bond program, the voters and council approved $10 million in sidewalks and ADA enhancements. And with the 2021 road bond program, they approved another, don't quote me on the number, I don't have it in front of me, but another $10 to $12 million for ADA and specifically bike lanes and shared use paths to further enhance the recently approved bike master plan. So the city has numerous times reaffirmed its commitment to bike lanes and being bike and pedestrian friendly. We feel that the granting of this variance would not necessarily be in compliance with the code per that section. The next section, the third question, is that the conditions that create the need for the variance do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. I don't necessarily see that this complies either. You generally don't want bikes on I-35, but bikes are allowed to be on the service road of I-35. And I had some conversations with our transportation planner about this. I really struggled with, the concept, because I do agree with the applicant that the safety of bikes is something we need to seriously consider. And there is apparently a multiple ways that we track cyclists, and ironically, the service road in this area appears to be a fairly heavily trafficked bike route. So simply eliminating the need for bike lanes on Aviation Drive won't necessarily reduce the bike traffic that apparently is already in the area. The fourth criteria, that the application of a provision of this code will render subdivision of the land impossible. I don't see how the subdivision of the land would be impossible if the bike lanes are put in. The bike lanes are intended to be entirely in the right of way. It's possible they could be in an easement, but I don't think that's the plan, at least based on the plan that's on your screen here. They can certainly subdivide without granting this variance. And then the last criteria is where the literal enforcement of these regulations would result in an unnecessary hardship. I recall the letter talked about cost, and it did talk about safety as well. The letter that accompanied the request, the variance request. Usually the hardship on cost is generally not something that is factored in and not to be considered. I would urge P&Z not to consider the cost of the bike lane and the striping or a separate shared use path, simply because, and this is, I think, a very important point, the Georgetown Transportation Enhancement Corporation, a sister board to this group, receives a 0.5 cent sales tax revenue that is dedicated strictly to transportation enhancement projects that will help promote economic development opportunity. When I first started this item, I'd mentioned that we'd entered into a partnership and an incentive agreement. One of the incentive agreements is with the Georgetown Transportation Enhancement Corporation, and they have agreed to fund the extension of Aviation Drive up to $8 million. So the sales tax revenue that goes to that board is going to pay for the bulk of this. The applicant has indicated that there are cost overruns. I've not been able to assess that yet. I will work with them to try and value engineer their project to get within that original budget. They can also ask GTEC for additional funds. Additional funds are not budgeted, but my primary concern with that is that typically when GTEC funds a road, GTEC is not looking for variances. They expect the road to be built per code. And it might be an uncomfortable conversation with GTEC as far as if the scope is changed and bike lanes and the UDC is not strictly followed, there could be some I don't even want to say ill will, but no variances were represented at GTEC when they approved this project. The project was admittedly in its infancy. There was no design done. The challenges that the applicant seems to be experiencing now were not known at the time. But typically every GTEC project that I've been associated with, and they have contributed tens of millions of dollars to our roadway infrastructure, has never included a variance. We've typically included sidewalks, and now that the bike master plan has been approved, we will include bike and shared use paths as well. I'm sorry, I've said a lot. What's on your screen still is just the proposed layout, and there are some cross sections that show what the road will look like and where the bike lane could potentially come in. I hope that's zooming in. Yeah, it is a little bit. I'm sorry, it's a little small. I can zoom in on more specific areas if you'd like. But the ultimate intent of the UDC is to have 4 lanes, 2 in each direction with a center turn lane, and then the bike lanes on each side, kind of as shown on the top of your screen. We are working with the applicant as far as unique and modified cross sections that would accommodate truck traffic, turning movements, bikes, assuming the variance is not granted, and water quality issues. We're trying to make this as practical as possible. We know there's going to be a lot of trucks out there. It's not only going to be trucks, but it is currently intended to be largely industrial. That is generally staff's report. Staff does not feel the request complies, and staff's recommendation is denial. I will mention, as has been mentioned on variances previously, when the commission is making a motion to approve or deny, the commission is apparently required to identify and recite factors as far as what has been met and what has not been met. I'll put that back up on the screen, and myself and the other engineering staff are available to answer any questions that the commission has. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wright. We appreciate it. Commissioner, do you have any questions for staff on this item?
This is Kayla McCord. I do have 1 or 2 questions. Mr. Wright, and I'm sorry if this was made clear and it just didn't sink in, but the shared bike path that's being recommended, would that be within the right-of-way of the proposed extension, or would it be on private property?
It would almost certainly be within the right-of-way.
Okay.
If it's in the roadway, it will be absolutely within the right-of-way. And the only reason I say almost certainly is the current design is, yes, entirely within the right-of-way. Something may come up where for some reason it's advantageous to them, or it makes sense. Maybe there's a environmental concern or a tree to be saved or something like that. But the intent is, yes, entirely within the right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. And the applicant has maintained that the shared use path would reduce lane width then, and would restrict turning radius for very large trucks. Do you see that as, is that create any kind of substantial safety issue?
I don't think so. And I don't want to necessarily argue with our partners on this, but I think if I were to agree with what has been said there, then I would be going against the idea of bike lanes on any road. There is intended to be a center turn lane. A center turn lane is not required, but turn lane pockets could be put in, but given the nature of the truck traffic in the area, I suspect a shared center turn lane will be put in. And it will effectively have unrestricted radius for turning in those areas. And we're still in the design phase of the road, so that the lanes can be striped in such a way, the center turn lane can be built in such a way that there is plenty of room to make these turns for trucks and passenger vehicles as well. I do not think that is a legitimate concern.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the question.
Okay, commissioners, any other questions for staff on this item?
And commissioners, I'm sorry, I don't have a good summary list of the criteria, but I can scroll.
It's in our agenda, so
Excellent.
yeah.
Excuse me, Chair. Excuse me, Wes. We can pull up that presentation if that's helpful for you to see it on one place. But this is a subdivision variance. So just to remind the commission that it does require. Let me get back up here to my notes here. A variance does require that at least 4 of the following factors are required for approval. So those factors are listed in your staff report. Ethan will bring those up on one consistent slide for you here shortly. But that is a UDC provision. At least 4 of the following factors are required to approve this variance.
But not for recommendation of disapproval, correct?
That's right. That's right. And you've had these variances before. I just wanted to remind you of that. Thank you.
Okay. Is the applicant present? Would they like to speak on this item?
This is Clayton Strolley with Pacheco Coke, 8701 North Mopac, Suite 320, Austin, Texas 78759. I mean, our biggest reason for the variance is the safety issue. I mean, like Sophia said, it's got to meet 4 of the 5 criteria. You know, 2 of the 5 we thought were legitimate, but our largest thing was just the safety issue. The industrial development with more and more trucks on the road, and then bikes going out to 35. We were intrigued by what Wesley showed us about the tracking of the bikes. I was unaware of that technology, or that 35 was such a heavy access road for the bikes. But I mean, our biggest reason was just a safety issue of putting them next to big trucks, considering the cross section and how the road's being designed, and that shared use path would almost butt up right to the curb, and put them in close proximity to each other. So we're here to answer any questions, and the owner's on the line as well. I don't know if they want to say anything as well.
Thank you, Clayton. This is Sal with Sal Perdomo with Titan Development, 4903 Woodrow Avenue, Unit A in Austin. Just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you for hearing this item. We second everything that Clayton said, and we're here to answer any questions. So thank you, Chair and members of the commission. Thank you, Wesley.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here with us this evening. Okay, commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicants? If not, we can open the public hearing on this item. So far, I don't see that we have anybody signed up to speak on this item.
You're correct, Chair. I do not see anybody in the chat or raising their hands seeking to speak at this moment.
That's what I see. Okay, so based on that, we close the public hearing and the floor is open to a motion.
Travis, this is Sheree. I'd like to put forth a motion to deny the request for the subdivision variance as recommended by staff from section 12.2 02030 of the Unified Development Code related to the required bicycle lanes on a minor artery roadway to allow for a new minor artery. I believe I said that right.
Okay, we have a motion to deny the subdivision variance by Commissioner Heitzman. Do we have a second?
This is Doug Noble. I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Noble, second. Any discussion on this item? If not, Myrna, would you please call the roll on this item?
Sherry Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
No.
Travis Purthew,
Yes.
Doug Noble.
Yes.
So if I counted that, is that 4 in favor, 1 opposed, or 5
Yes,
and
sir.
1?
4 and 1.
4 and 1. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you all for your time. Have a good evening.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Let's see. What's our next one? Next item is item BZ. I am a recusal on this one, so I will let Commissioner Heinzman handle this one, and then I'll be back for the next item.
All right. All right, item BZ, it's a public hearing and possible action on a request for a subdivision variance from section 12.5.010C of the UDC related to the requirements that all existing streets in adjoining areas shall be connected and continued into the new subdivision in order to eliminate the required connection to the residential subdivision to the south for new commercial subdivision consisting of approximately 85.734 acres in the David Wright Survey, abstract number 13, John Berry Survey, abstract number 51, and Orville Perry Survey, abstract number 10, generally located at 2550 North IH 35. Ethan, are you presenting, or Mr. Wright, are you going to present this item?
I'll be presenting this one if that is all right.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this time again. This item is another subdivision variance related to a similar development that you just heard about. If I could boil down this big long caption into one bullet point, it would be that we were going to be discussing the elimination of the requirement to extend Dogwood Drive out of the Crystal Knoll neighborhood through what we know as the North Park 130 PUD. It's also being referred to these days as Gateway 35 project. The North Park 130 PUD is a PUD that was approved this past year. Y'all probably remember discussions you had about it here at your regular meetings. It's an industrial park that is zoned as a planned unit development with a business park based zoning. This is directly to the to the north of the Crystal Knoll neighborhood, which is an ETJ neighborhood of about 400 lots. If you'll remember during those discussions, we had a lot of talk about how we treated the property along the freeway frontages. And we had a lot of talk about how the industrial development here was going to relate to the residential development to the south. Eventually, it was established that there would be a large buffer and different kinds of screening to help with some of that those issues. You may remember also a conversation we had about some street stubs that were coming out of the Crystal Knoll neighborhood that our code requires to be extended. The Crystal Knoll neighborhood is a very established neighborhood that's been around for a long time. And as a part of that subdivision plat, they left multiple street stubs around the property with the intention that these streets would be extended. Of course, over the years, different things have prevented that. whether that was just a lack of development to actually extend the stub, or situations like end up being created to the west with the VD apartments that were exempt from plating and thus not required to extend the street stubs along the western boundary through to Interloop or Suddiff Drive. The street stub that borders the North Park 130 PUD that we're talking about today is specifically a street called Dogwood Drive. You'll see it called out there at the top of the screen. It is just one of the connections that either exist today or are proposed, or excuse me, or still exist to be extended through the Crystal Knoll neighborhood. You have existing connections on a County Road 152. If you've ever driven out to Berry Springs Park, you know that curve well. And then you also have a connection down to Stadium Drive. If you go down Stadium Drive and go west, you head to the LCRI substation we talked about last week. Or if you go east, it tees into County Road 152 here. There are about 322 lots in this subdivision that take access off of Crystal Knoll Boulevard. About 245 of those have one way in and one way out. And the extension of Dogwood Drive here would provide that access for residents or for emergencies. The North Park 130 PUD for the property to the north did establish that no driveways should ever be established here. But because of the concern with the industrial traffic mixing with the residential traffic, it was stated that the decision on whether or not the street stub should be extended should be processed through the subdivision variance process. Our code says that whenever there's a street stub left to a property, that street should either be extended through that property to the other edge of the property or through to the next through street. Like you see in what this street extension could potentially look like with that red line tying up to the new collector road with tearaway that would connect between the two freeways. During our review, staff really found that we could not get to a place where we could support just because of the connectivity requirements in our code that I can ask our engineers to go into further if we need to, but we could not support a full elimination of this access here, that it would still be important to maintain some level of emergency access into that part of the neighborhood, seeing as how the entrances to the neighborhoods were so far away and you had so many homes that could potentially be blocked off. So as I review our approval criteria for the subdivision variance, please note that this is coming with staff's recommendation that these be conditions of the approval. That a 20-foot wide gated fire access connection be made, that fire access be rated to carry vehicles per the fire code, and that fire emergency access, be an emergency access easement dedicated to the public, and that it would be extended through to a public street so that emergency vehicles could access it from the other end outside the neighborhood. With those three conditions in mind, staff found that we fully complied with 3 of our criteria for subdivision, partially complied with 1, and did not comply with the other. We found that while for the first criteria concerning the public health, safety, and welfare, we found that having the variance, providing the connection would be a big win to residents in the community. However, this is an existing condition that we live with today, and even provide at the very minimum, providing the emergency access would still be a win and improvement over what exists on the ground today. We also do not want to encourage through traffic cutting through the neighborhood, especially industrial traffic, maybe cutting through the neighborhood to leave the industrial park to come through that neighborhood. We found that this does comply with several of our comprehensive plan policies related to land use transitions and phasing. We found that this does not apply to other property in the vicinity. There's one more property on the east side of the subdivision that this could potentially apply to. However, it has not yet received any sort of zoning designation. We don't know what kind of We don't know if it will be an industrial park yet or not. And so we don't know if the stub that extends in there would be subject to the same conditions that are creating the need for this variance. We did not find that the strict application of the provision of this code would render the subdivision of the property impossible. This 85 acres is free of most natural features or any man-made features that might prevent further subdivision or the actual construction of the road. We did find that this could pose a hardship just because when you cut a new street through the site, you all of a sudden now have new street setbacks, which can reduce area. And as I stated before, within this PUD, this is very clearly stated in the PUD intended to be an industrial park where you have large buildings and loading areas and that kind of a thing. Placing those larger setbacks, screening requirements, that sort of a thing, could potentially be seen as a hardship for this applicant. We did publish notice, our standard notice from the 300-foot buffer, and did not receive any public comments on it. And just like our previous item, this is a subdivision variance, and so you do need a 3/4 vote of the commission on the dais tonight to approve. So I believe we have 4 with Commissioner Perthius abstaining, and so you would need 3 votes to approve if the motion was in favor. So I'm available for questions. The applicant is also here, and we have our engineering staff as well if you need it.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Do we have any questions at this time from the commissioners to either the applicant or to Ethan?
This is Kayla McCord. Mr. Harwell, I just wanted to find out the emergency access road. I understand there are very specific recommendations relative to that, should the variance be approved. But there is no requirement that that emergency access be in a straight line, is there?
No, ma'am.
The reason I'm asking is because I know that they are proposing, the adjoining PUD proposes a detention pond and, to handle drainage issues. And I know that there are some natural buffers, trees along the fence line, things of that nature. And I just wanted to make sure it didn't need to be in a straight line necessarily.
No, ma'am, it doesn't need to be in a straight line. The alignment could vary. And there are some limits on, turn radiuses and that kind of thing for fire trucks. But the third condition that was on the screen before would just require them to push it through to a public street, through the park, through the industrial park. So they could bring it up here in a straight line as you show. They could bring it along the property line and somehow tie it in and meet turn radius requirements.
Thank you.
It leaves flexibility for them.
That answers my question. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, thank you, Kayla. Do we have any other commissioners that would like to address Ethan or the applicant? All right, Ethan, you said the applicant is on the line. Do they wish to address the commissioners at this time?
Sorry, again, this is Clayton Stroley, 8701 North Mopac, Suite 320, Austin, Texas, 78759. I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Ethan was talking about, that we're going for this variance to, eliminate that connection for the most part from the road. And most of it was in conversations with the Crystal neighborhood to the south. Their concern of trucks getting through and their drainage concerns for us, and then us putting a pond on the south side to alleviate the drainage issues that they have on site and stuff coming from our site to make that issue better. So by doing that, it kind of hinders a connection that goes through there. Ethan's conditions, I think, are achievable based on some of the designs that we have. So we just wanted to give some more background that
this came about, you know, through conversations with the neighborhood and trying to assist them with their drainage issues. And again, the owners on the line if they want to speak as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stroley. Any questions from the commissioners to Mr. Stroley? All right, Sophia, I don't see anyone raising their hand to speak from the public. Do you see anyone that would like to?
No, ma'am, I do not. No hands raised, nor do I see a chat wanting to speak.
All right, thank you, Sophia. With that being said, then I'd like to see if any commissioner would like to put forth a motion as it pertains to this item.
This is Kayla McCord. I'm going to try to struggle through one. I would move for approval conditioned on the following: that there be installation of a minimum 20-foot wide gated fire and emergency access connection to Dogwood Drive, and that paving of said access must be constructed to carry at least 75,000 pounds, and that the access road be extended through the industrial park with a minimum 20-foot wide, within a minimum 20-foot wide fire and emergency access easement, based on the following criteria: that the requested variance is not detrimental to public safety, health, or welfare, that it does not conflict with the comprehensive plan, that conditions creating the need for the variance don't apply to nearby properties, and that enforcement of the regulations would result in unnecessary hardship. However, I believe the request does not comply with the criterion that application of the code would render subdivision of the land impossible.
All right, thank you, Kayla, for that recommendation. Do I have a second to Kayla's recommendation with the noted exceptions? All right, hearing no second, that motion has died. Do I have a alternate recommendation from the commissioners as pertains to this item?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I would second the motion that she has made. This is Doug Noble.
All right, Sophia, is that fine? Can we go ahead and accept Doug's second of Kayla's recommendation?
Yes, that's just fine.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Doug. All right, with that being said, Myrna, would you please call the roll?
Cherie Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Doug Noble.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes 4-0. Thank you, everyone. And with that being said, I'll turn the meeting back over to Commissioner Perthes.
Thank you. Okay, next item we have is item CA, public hearing, possible action on a zoning map amendment. And this is Mr. Harwell.
It is me, if I can get my computer up here. Right. Wonderful. This item is going to be a request for a PUD amendment, so moving away from our subdivision variance street tonight. The PUD that we are amending is known as the Sun City Neighborhood 61 PUD, This will be the second amendment to this PUD since it was approved in 2007. If any of you were here in January 2020, you may remember a pretty fun night when we had the council chambers packed, and the item ended up being delayed. This request is in response to that, and the feedback heard from the Sun City residents nearby. So the property that we're going to be discussing is on the what I call the southwest corner of Sun City Boulevard and Highway 195. It has frontage along Highway 195, frontage along Sun City Boulevard, and frontage along Oak Branch Drive in the Shady Oaks neighborhood. To the south, you have some new sections of Sun City that are part of the Queens Tracts PUD. I think Sun City residents refer to it as the Retreat. You have some undeveloped commercial properties there along the Highway 195 frontage. If you are familiar with the Sun City softball field and community gardens, those are directly behind this property, or part of this property actually. And then you have the Shady Oaks Estates neighborhood, which is a large lot single family neighborhood in the ETJ. Generally, property on the opposite side of 195 is undeveloped, save for a few mining and utility type uses. The current zoning is a planned unit development with a residential single family zoning. And this is a result of two different efforts to zone the property as a PUD. The original PUD in 2007 took all 23 acres and allowed for the concept you see there on the left. And this was a maximum of 55 homes, 6,000 square foot lots, and included some terms for buffering to the community gardens, which existed at the time. In 2009, we saw the rezoning to what you see on the screen here. It allowed for the construction of the softball field and the dog park, reduced the number of homes slightly, but kept most of the other development standards the same, still providing for some buffering between the amenities in the homes. So what you see on the right, the 2009 PUD, that is what could be built there today. The future land use designation is mixed density neighborhood. And like you'll know, we discuss a lot. This is our category that most of the city is in, where we encourage your traditional single family homes, but when appropriate, we really look for ways to diversify our housing stock here in the city. This could be by providing slightly more dense products, attached single family duplex products, townhome products at key locations in neighborhoods, or where we can provide some sort of neighborhood serving retail uses or services that is also appropriate here. The amendment before you tonight does several things. The first thing it does is modify the permitted uses and the number of homes that could be built here. Currently, under that 2009 PUD, 30 single family homes could be built here. The proposed PUD would, 30 dwelling units. The proposed amendments would increase that to 75. That would be an increase of 45 units. And whereas the previous two PUDs, the majority of Sun City, are a single family detached product, that's your traditional single family home, this would be a single family attached product. That would also be a change you see here. A single family attached product, from the outside, you would think it looks just like a duplex, but there is a lot line down the middle. They're traditionally owned, owner occupied. Then the remainder of the changes are some cosmetic changes to highlight, to buffer from adjacent development and to beautify the highway. The first kind of buffering item we have is a 50-foot buffer to Oak Branch Drive. This was discussed in our previous PUD amendment that was not approved. But like you'll see on the concept plan, there's no proposed connection onto Oak Branch Drive. And this 50-foot buffer would provide an option for the developer to construct a masonry wall and provide a number of plantings on the opposite side of the wall facing Oak Branch Drive to beautify that. That would be a combination of shrubs, ornamental trees, and shade trees. The reason this is so wide is to accommodate for a 25-foot electric easement. So within that easement, the PUD does propose terms that keeps low plantings minimally invasive. And then on the inside of the easement, that's where you would have most of your landscaping. So this would be a pretty wide buffer. This property sits just outside of where our highway gateway overlay district ends on Highway 195. So the applicant has been very generous to agree to some terms that mimic those planting requirements for properties within the overlay district along Highway 195. That's your 25-foot gateway buffer. And here with the increased density, we did find it appropriate to reduce the 25-foot buffer yard between the homes and the amenities from 25 feet to 15 feet. This is planted at our median level here. So here's a wonderful illustration. You'll see that the main drive into this part of this new Sun City neighborhood would come off Cattleman Drive, where there's an existing intersection, have a small little cul-de-sac, and you can see it works around an existing drainage swale that carries stormwater off of the highway down to a property in the bottom right-hand corner. And you'll see that it does make a loop that would be required to provide 2 points of access. But given that street is a median, you would be right in, right out only. So in general, staff found that it complies with all of our approval criteria for rezoning in PUD, save for one. Of course, we had a complete application. We found that the provision of the attached product would be a good move towards what our mixed-use neighborhood envisions for this area. Our mixed density neighborhood future land use category envisions for this area. There are some parts of Sun City within the Somerset tract and the Queens tract that do provide for some different lot types, housing products other than your traditional single family. However, we have not seen any of those constructed yet. This would further play off of this. The attached, in our comprehensive plan, we have terms for recommendations on where different lots, housing types and products should go within a neighborhood. And here at the front of Sun City, separated on two sides by right-of-way, not directly adjacent to any other single-family homes, we find that this is a great place to provide an attached product. It does promote the health, safety, and welfare. You find a complete plan taking into account existing intersections and driveway connections, as well as thinking through different buffering options and landscaping for purely aesthetic reasons. We do find it's compatible with present zoning. You have single-family detached uses and single-family attached uses, both single-family uses. And then, of course, the property is suitable to be rezoned. There is some significant tree cover on the property, but nothing that cannot be worked around in our tree ordinance. We do find that for the reasons I mentioned earlier, this would provide an additional housing type when you look at the Sun City community as a whole, across the development agreement and the two areas covered by a PUD. We do find, like I mentioned earlier, that this is a creative arrangement, placing a denser, newer housing type within the community in an area where there is great buffering between established neighborhoods. We do find that with the concept plan provided, they are planning for the comprehensive transportation system. The PUD does have terms that also address sidewalks. Where we find it partially complies is, of course, our cultural and recreational facilities being provided for all segments of the community, but they would be paying into our parkland dedication fees that are used to purchase and develop parkland in other parts of the city. And of course, when you look at this as a whole within the Sun City development, and you have plenty of private amenities that are planned within the community. They also are working around those natural drainage swales, so we find that they're planning for their building envelopes. And then, of course, this would likely be a single phase development, so we find that development will be staged appropriately. We did notify 31 property owners and a registered neighborhood association within the 300-foot buffer. We received 4 letters in opposition and 1 letter in favor that were included in your agenda packet. This is a public hearing. No supermajority required on this one. I'm available for questions, and of course the applicant does have a few slides for you if you also wish.
Thank you, Ethan. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff?
Yes, Ethan, this is Commissioner Heinzman. I do have just a clarifying question.
Yes, ma'am.
So the applicant is requesting to increase the already approved single homes from 30 to that of 62 to 75, basically doubling. And so we're still referring to these as single homes, but this is basically what, a garden home or a duplex is what they're proposing versus a single residential?
Yes, from the outside, it would look much like a duplex to you. Garden homes sometimes
Right.
get how you set it up.
Yeah, it's all how we present it. But so
Yeah.
basically, we're going from single family to duplexes in this condensed area, correct?
So, it is a duplex style product, but it is still considered single family because each unit would be on its own individually platted lot.
All right. I guess I would love to hear from the applicant on the slides they'd like to share with the commission.
Well, first, let's see if any other commissioners have questions for staff. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Harwell this evening? Okay, well, if the applicant is present and wants to make a presentation, name, address, and then we'll give you a few minutes to go over that.
Sounds great. Good evening, commissioners. Hopefully you can see Ethan's screen. Ethan's going to kind of pilot this for me, and I'll just skip through or move through the slides real quickly for y'all. My name is Peter Verdicchio at SEC Planning. Here this evening to make a very quick presentation to you on Neighborhood 61. As Ethan was kind of going through the history on this, I was just kind of smiling to myself because I've been involved in all of the entitlement efforts of Sun City going back to 1995. So it's hard to believe that we're here for a third time for consideration of land use for this piece of property. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just for a little bit of context for everybody, this slide here is the currently approved concept plan for the lands within the development agreement and concept plan of Sun City. And I say that specifically because Sun City is actually governed by 4 different governing documents. There's 3 PUDs in place. One Ethan was referring to as the Queen property, or the Queen PUD, which is immediately south of this property. This property falls within the original Sun City development agreement. So this property in particular, the residential portion of this, has been identified and communicated as residential dating back to 1995. It was mentioned earlier, we had explored other alternatives, with this being an intersection of Sun City Boulevard and 195 for commercial and other uses about 1.5 years ago. And it was clear from the resident comments that we received that there's not support for that type of a use. So we've spent the last year studying market trends, buyer preferences, that sort of thing. And we're coming back to you this evening for what, in our opinion, is a slight modification to the approved land uses in our concept plan, as well as the city's future land use plan. If we could go to the next slide, please. So specifically to this piece of property, the roughly 25 acres, we're not asking for any changes at all to the purple that you see on your screen. That is the softball field, dog park, and all those associated facilities. That area is completely constructed, enjoyed by the residents. We're simply asking for your consideration of a density increase to the yellow portion that you see here of the 17 acres. When the last amendment went through on this property back in 2009, this portion of Georgetown was still developing. The region was certainly still developing. And there really at the time was not an appetite or desire for or market demand for attached product. Since then, with the maturing of the area, there is an interest in attached product. And that's why we've looked at this corner now and said, perhaps there's an opportunity for a different type of housing here. And so what's before you in the PUD is the request for attached single-family product. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got some pictures of the current softball field. And I forgot I had that slide in there. If we could go to the next one, please. I guess I lost a slide in my process here. I don't remember having this there. I'm not sure what happened here, Ethan. Anyway, I'll just speak to it. The reason for the attached, like I said, is maturing and changing of the community and a market demand. And one of the things with is we feel like there's an opportunity for a product for a different lifestyle where attached product, lock and leave is a little bit more appealing. And so up here we go, perfect. So we have the attached product included. And one of the key things with that is it is an increase in density, fully acknowledged, but recognizing it is a much more intense intersection location within the community. But very important to us, this is an application or request by Del Webb, the builders of the project for the last 20 years. And we're holding firm to housing in a neighborhood that's consistent with the 70, 80 other neighborhoods within Sun City. So this project, this neighborhood would be developed with characteristics very consistent with Sun City today. We go to the next. I think this is probably it. It is. So again, I'm here available to answer any questions you may have. I know we also have Steve Ashlock with Pulte Homes available as well this evening for any questions that you all may have. Appreciate your time and your consideration.
Thanks, sir. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant on this item?
Yeah, this is Kayla McCord. I just want to make sure. It appears to me that the extension of Cattleman's into that particular tract am I correct that it has been expected or planned that that would go into that tract ever since the 2009 Pud Amendment?
Yes, ma'am. Sun City Boulevard, actually, to be honest with you, it's kind of ironic to describe it to you this way. That intersection at Sun City Boulevard was first designed and contemplated for access to this property well before Pulte considered purchasing the Queen property in the neighborhoods to the south. So although Cattleman was built first at that median break, Cattleman was lined up to an existing median break that had been constructed to serve this property back in 2009.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioners, any other questions for the applicant? Okay, not hearing any. We can open the public hearing. I don't believe we have anybody signed up to speak on this item as well.
Chair, you do. You have a Louise Smith that has her hand raised. Louise, can you hear us and can you unmute yourself to speak?
Yes, I can. What I particularly would like.
Hold on. Can you state your name and address for us before you begin?
Louise Smith, 100 Stetson Trail, Georgetown, Texas.
Okay, go ahead.
What I particularly would like to know is what kind of noise abatement you are planning, since you've knock the green space between those homes and the softball park down to 15 feet. Sun City has already had to put up noise abatement around pickleball courts in the retreat area, Queens Track. 15 feet to a softball field, to me, that's going to be a real noise issue, and I'd like to know what you're planning to take care of that.
Okay. Thank you for your comment, Mrs. Smith. Let's see. I don't believe we have anyone else signed up to speak this evening. Is that correct, Sophia?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, then on that, we'll close the public hearing and we can entertain a motion.
This is Kayla McCord. I move to approve the request. I move to approve the request for a PUD amendment, for PUD amendment number 2 to the described property.
Okay, we have a motion for approval, Commissioner McCord.
I'll second it.
And Commissioner Haney with a second on that motion. Any discussion on this item? If not, Myrna, will you please call the roll?
Sherry Heinzman,
Can
Sherry,
can I hold my vote until I hear everyone else's, please?
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Doug Noble,
Yes.
Sherry Heinzman.
No.
Okay, so that motion passes. And that will take us to, let's see. We have Mr. Wagner with us here this evening to talk about the 2030 annual report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Nat Wagner, Long Range Planning, here to present to you tonight the first ever annual report for the 2030 Comprehensive Plan. And like to thank my colleagues in the department for helping bring this presentation together. I'd like to thank you, Commissioners. Some of you were around in 2018 when we began the update and contributed to the update. So I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for your participation. Also, share with you a gratitude for your work in helping to implement the comprehensive plan. You see it every night as it comes before you, particularly for rezoning requests. So tonight is from the department. I'd like to thank you personally on their behalf. Tonight, I'd like to walk through with you really accomplish three things with you tonight. The first would be to talk with you about the report itself and make sure that the report makes sense and that it's accessible to you and to the public, that this can be something that we can all learn from and apply it, and that there's value in it. So I'd like to really get your feedback on that. Also like to talk with you about some of the tools that we have as a staff and with your guidance developed to help you with your decision making. You had several rezonings before you tonight, and we want to make sure that the tools that we're presenting and using for your decision making are effective, and that you see the connection between those and the goals of the 2030 plan. And then also want to share with you what we have planned, what we've completed so far since March of 2020 when the plan was adopted, and what we have on the horizon in 2021. So please, this is meant to be interactive, so you have some features that you can use. There's a chat function which I'm sure my colleagues will help me monitor. If you have any questions, you can also raise your hand, or please just interrupt me at any time. But want to share with you and get your feedback on this report. So why do we have a plan? Well, it's in our comprehensive plan. It's our practice. There's a requirement in that plan that we bring forward a report every year to show the progress we've made, and also to get your feedback on any changes that are needed. We were fortunate to visit with the Comprehensive Steering Plan Committee back in March, and we've been modifying and tweaking and really getting this report well crafted to present to you this week. And then we'd like to share it with the City Council and ultimately the public. There's good value in that. We asked for the public's input over the course of those 2 years, and we got a lot of comments and we got a lot of participation. So we want to make sure that we go back to the public who gave us their vision for what Georgetown should be in 2030. We want to be able to share with the public what we've been up to and how we're working towards that vision that they asked us to work towards for Georgetown. And then lastly, it's an opportunity for us to talk about our work. It's a chance for us to share with you how we apply the Unified Development Code in terms of the rulemaking. It's a chance for us to share with you the policies that are adopted by the City Council and how they affect your work, and then to get feedback from you about how we can support you in that effort. So tonight, I'd like to talk with you briefly about some of the changes that have happened, some as a result of the decisions that you have made on the commission, and then some are just a natural outcome of where we live. One of those is population growth, and we in the planning department do track and make estimates about our population. There's a lot of good reasons that we do that. We get a lot of questions from the public about how we're growing, but just based on residential building permits in the city, we estimate that in the last 2 years that we've grown at about 8.5%. And what that means for you is that 6,000 new people came to Georgetown last year. And in the course of 6,000, when my father-in-law was born here in Georgetown, that's how many people lived in the total city. And now we're adding that annually. And to me, that's a pretty incredible growth rate. You can see in our, just after the 2010 census, our rate of growth and that it's steady incline. Cities that grow between 3.5% to 5.5% is a healthy growth rate. And we are exceeding that certainly over the last 3 years. We've also grown in terms of the size of our footprint of the city. We're just at about 59 square miles for the city and about 180 for the total planning area, which is a small increase over last year. We did give back some land out of the city limits in a disannexation of about 80 acres, but in total, we added about 1 square mile last year. As we add people and as we add land, we're looking at how dense of a community we are. Last year, we got to about 1,200 people per square mile in the city, which is up about 100 people per square mile from last year. If any of you have been to Waco or remember Waco in 2015, Waco was about 1,400 people per square mile. So we're trying to keep a tab on how we're growing in terms of people, number of rooftops, but then also how big of a city we're becoming, and then just how dense of a city we're becoming as we continue to be part of a growing regional, a regional area that's experiencing extreme growth. We're also looking at how our land is used. And one of those measures, at least at a zoning level, we can measure with our zoning map. And we are looking at how properties are zoned. And in last year, we had a slight increase in the number of acres that are zoned for single family. Those went from about 48% to 49%. So about half of our zoning districts are devoted to residential rooftops. And then because of that slight increase, there was a slight decrease in the amount of acres that are zoned for agriculture. And these numbers are important. I think when we began the endeavor of the comp plan update, the council's question was, what is the balance of land use and how are we reserving enough land for commercial to tax base to support our residential and our residential tax base. So we're keeping tabs on how these zoning districts are changing and share with you what those impacts may be. So where is growth happening? Well, to help illustrate that, where the growth is happening in our community, we mapped residential subdivisions with 10 or more lots. And we publish this map quarterly. You may have seen it before. And what I'm highlighting is those areas where you see dense residential development permitting, you see a coloration in the map. And I'd like to draw your attention to 2 red squares on the map. Those happen along east of I-35 in southeast Georgetown. There are some residential subdivisions over there, like the Carlson Place or Saddle Creek, Fairhaven, West Haven, and La Cantera. There is a tremendous amount of there are a tremendous amount of building permits being pulled over there. There are also building permits which are being concentrated west of I-35 along State Highway 29. And then lastly, up in the northwest quadrant, in one of the cases that you just evaluated, there's also a density of residential building permits this quarter in the Sun City area. And the reason it's important when we think about just more simply our pattern, we think about residential development and we think about commercial development. So it's like squeezing a balloon at one end. If you squeeze the balloon at one end for residential, you may be reducing the amount of acreage or developable area for commercial. So important to think about the balance of land use when we think about just simply in terms of residential and non-residential or commercial. And the concentration of single family homes in this area, in these areas, means that there's limited space for non-residential uses like office buildings, restaurants, or public spaces and parks. Kind of a fast and fun fact for you all. Back in 2015, we were looking at about 300 to 400 residential building permits being pulled annually. And in 2020, we are looking at closer to 1,800 residential building permits being pulled in the city limits. Back in 2015, there was almost an even split between the number of building permits in the city limits and utility connections in the ETJ, about 300 to 400 each. So effectively, there were residential building permits being pulled in the city limits, and then there were utility connections being pulled outside of those city limits, almost an even split. But today, residential building permits far exceed the number of utility permits pulled in the ETJ. And that's another sign of us densifying in terms of building within our city limits or our city footprint. So as I shared, when you think about the balance of land uses and you think more simply about residential versus non-residential or commercial, we are also interested in where the development pattern is happening for non-residential uses. This development pattern is concentrating along the I-35 corridor, as well as some of our other major arterials like State Highway 29. I'd like to call your attention more specifically to an area I've highlighted with a dashed purple box. That's the area between Lakeway, Airport, Berry Creek Drive, and I-35 up in northern Georgetown. There are some land uses that I'd like to call your attention to. Those are the deep purple. Those are employment center, and the deep red, which is regional center, and then the lighter pink, which is our community center. These are all areas on our future land use which are meant to support intense commercial, employment, and industrial uses. And I'd like to call your attention to some of the developments that are happening. You had a development, the Titan development that came before you this evening. that is in this area. It's southeast of the intersection of State Highway 130 and east of 35. I'd like to share with you that up by the Georgetown Municipal Airport, the Employment Center, which is identified in that deep purple, you can see there that the Texas Outdoor Power Equipment Company is located near there. This employment center is about 300 acres in size. Within this area, about 75% of that is developed or will be developed with non-residential uses. And the remaining 26% is currently zoned for agriculture or is unentitled. So there is an intensity of commercial development happening at this node of I-35 and State Highway 130. So what does that mean for you, these development patterns, these trends? I do have a question that I'd like to just answer. The question was, does this slide include the ETJs in these numbers or just the city limits? I think if I may, in terms of the numbers we're talking about, if we're talking about population, we're talking about just in the city limits. The residential building permits that I was sharing with you on the slide for the heat map, the intensity of residential development, I'm sharing with you within the city limits for building permits. And we do have a definition for regional center. I see my colleague Cesar is typing that answer. Thank you very much, Cesar. But regional centers are meant to be big box, support big box retail. They can also support other types of large commercial, some office uses, but they also can support, secondarily, they can support high density residential uses. They are meant to be primarily commercial in nature, with 80% of those uses supporting commercial, and secondarily, as I mentioned, can support high density residential. So thanks for those questions. Keep them coming. I appreciate that. I'd like to move on to kind of the second part of tonight's dialogue with you all about the tools that we have created with your guidance to help keep track with our decision-making process. These tools are rooted in distinct conversations that we had with the community over the course of those 2 years of the update. We heard about making sure that Georgetown continued to be a distinct place. We heard about the city using its infrastructure to help promote the type of development that citizens have asked for. We heard about the need to make sure that neighborhoods where people live are complete in terms of having both amenities nearby them, as well as having access to things like retail and shopping. We heard about the need to diversify our housing stock. Appreciate the discussion earlier tonight about what does it mean to have different types of houses, different price points for housing, and different sizes, so that we have more choice in the marketplace in Georgetown. And then we also heard from the community, but also from the council, with this keen eye to balancing the amount of land we're reserving and using for commercial and the amount of land we're reserving and using for residential uses. And then lastly, the transition between uses. So how do all the parts of the puzzle for Georgetown fit together? As you'll see in the annual report, we're focusing on goal number 1 for this year, which is about those balances of land uses. So I'd like to share with you in this next several slides just 3 of these very distinct conversations as they relate to the balance of commercial to residential, housing diversity, and transition. And the question for you to consider, if you will, tonight is, how can we use these values or these community conversations to guide the decision making? And then what are the questions that you have about these 3 distinct community conversations as they relate to goal number 1? So the first tool I'd like to get your feedback on, and you've seen these in your staff reports as well, are target ratios. These are used during individual rezoning cases. It's meant to help guide the conversation and promote an understanding of the context. So when a site comes before you, we can show you or share with you how this individual request moves us towards or away from the balances that we are seeking as a community within its future land use. So what I'm sharing with you here is an example of a target ratio for the regional center, which strives for, as I mentioned in the 2030 plan, 80% of those uses to be non-residential and 20% of those uses to be residential. You'll see in the next set of slides that we do aggregate all of these decisions over the course of the year to show you what the overall impact to the regional center was from all the zoning cases, so that you can get a sense of if we're moving closer to or farther away from the target ratios. Some of the questions that we heard from the commission over this past year have been, are these strict rules that should be applied for each zoning case in which the commission or council, if they should not approve a request, or the question really is, if they approve the request, does it limit the next request? Or if the request fails to meet the target, should they deny that request? Or conversely, are these guidelines to help in the decision making? And the answer that we've heard from the council and the commission dialogue is that these are ratios act as guidelines to aid in the decision making. We know that each zoning case is unique. You heard issues about drainage, you heard issues about traffic and safety, you heard issues about connectivity to existing neighborhoods. Each of these zoning cases are unique. So it's not meant to be a rigid and strict application, but each zoning decision is based on context, and these target ratios are just one of several considerations to giving final approval. Considerations outside of the target ratios include things like compatibility, which we'll talk about later in this presentation, and how the development will impact the surrounding site, and what are the specific site constraints for that particular request. We also have faced some challenges in applying the target ratios. I'd love for your feedback tonight. I'll pause at this next slide to get your feedback, but some of the things that we've encountered in our staff analysis when applying the target ratios is, do we include or exclude the right-of-way? And what we have found is that major roadways like arterials like State Highway 29 or Westinghouse or Williams Drive or I-35, we've gone ahead and excluded those when we've calculated the acreage. But we have included them when we've looked at local roadways like streets that support neighborhoods. We've also struggled a little bit and found some challenge that just using the zoning districts alone does not help us properly account for how properties are actually used. A good example of that would be a rezoning case that came before the commission not too long ago near the Old Town, where it was actually zoned for an office use. It was zoned, it had an office zoning district, but it was actually used for residence. And so just pulling the zoning district information alone can present some challenges to how a property is actually used. We also heard some and have found that in just looking at the zoning districts and aggregating them into residential and non-residential, we don't really provide a breakdown between single family and multifamily. So in a later slide, I'll share with you how we add up all these target ratios to get to the overall impact. So I'd like to ask the commission if anyone would like to share any experiences they've had in using the target ratios as they consider zoning requests.
You're asking for feedback on that?
If you have any questions or concerns about target ratios that you have experienced, I'd welcome your feedback.
I don't really have any questions or concerns, although I know that as we've gone through that and those have become available, that seems to be something that on the items that we make recommendations for, council really looks at pretty closely. And I know that we've made recommendations for approval on a couple of items that have ultimately been voted down based on those land use ratios. So I think early on, we weren't aware that they were going to be quite as big of a deciding factor as they've become. So I think as it's gone along, I look at those a lot more closely when I look at applications that we get.
This is Kayla McCord. I agree with Mr. Perthius, but target ratios have been a problem for me, to be honest. Because, well, particularly in the southeastern part of the city, all the demand, or, well, certainly not all of it, but a great deal of it is for residential. And I don't know, maybe it's the areas that we have for future land use categories, but it's just been really difficult to resolve the disparities between demand and the city's vision for these land use categories. You know, I guess the question is, it's been difficult for me if we're looking at, are we going to deny development, residential development, in favor of commercial development or employment center development when the demand isn't there? And I don't know, it's just been kind of an issue for me. And I appreciate the opportunity to moan and groan about it.
Is there any additional information that you need when you consider a zoning request that may have an impact to that demand? In other words, is there any additional information related to the future land use category or the percent share of residential to commercial in this area that would help you with your decision making in some of these tough choices that you have to make recommendations on current demand versus the vision for the city?
Well, to some extent, that's my problem, because I don't know what to ask for that would help in that decision making. Normally, I'm going to simply fall back on the city's vision under the 2030 plan to conform with the target ratios. But when there's so much unentitled land or undeveloped land out there that's still zoned agricultural, it's difficult to know at what point to shut all that down and start thinking about, okay, we aren't going to be able to meet our ratios for that particular future land use area if we don't stop approving these requests. Although, as Travis pointed out, the city council looks very closely at the ratios. So I can respect that, and we just move forward.
Well, thank you for that feedback. What I'm hearing you say is that that you do find value in the target ratios, but you have found that it has presented some challenges to you in your decision making when you have perhaps areas where residential demand is high and you don't see the demand for the commercial, but the target ratios may be pointing towards limiting that residential development. Am I hearing you correctly?
That is correct. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's what she's saying. I mean, we could probably pull some of them up, but we've run into several situations where you've got these large tracts of undeveloped land and everything around them is developed residential. And now it's, well, this other stuff, as it's gone along and things have been developed that go into that ratio, I think we've ended up in a couple of situations where you've got the one undeveloped property that's left that hasn't yet been developed, And because everything around it within the, ratio area has, then you're pigeonholed into, hey, this whole track right here has now got to be employment center. But the market demand for employment center is not there. And then we've had property owners that come in that have, and buyers lined up for their property if they can develop it into, something different than what the target ratio is. So I think, it's just something we've got to work through. I think it is helpful. And it's certainly, depending on what you want to do with the property as a city, I think it could be real helpful in being a guideline to not make a recommendation on something as well. But it's been a challenge, but I think as we move through it and we at least understand how important it's going to be on our recommendation items, it, if nothing else, causes me to look at those a lot closer than maybe I would have. I don't know if that's helpful, but that would be my input.
Well, great. I'd like to share with you kind of the next set of tools in the toolkit as it relates to your decision making. I'm sharing with you some of the conceptual diagrams. We call them transition diagrams. Staff uses these diagrams when we meet with applicants and when we're internally doing our analysis and discussing application and requests, particularly when we think about the compatibility of uses. Each future land use category, as I mentioned those previously, we have our centers that are meant to be commercial. We have our residential future land uses. We have some open space and future land use categories. So when we think about those future land use categories, each future land use can allow for multiple zoning districts and different types of uses within those districts. So these diagrams help to visualize how neighboring zoning districts and associated uses can be organized to create a more gradual transition from higher intensity commercial and more dense residential uses to a less intense commercial area or a less dense residential area. These diagrams are like target ratios in that they're not absolute, but they do help guide that discussion. So just to give you an example of what a corridor in our future land use is, the Williams Drive or Westinghouse Road is a corridor. To give you an example of how our map is organized in terms of nodes, you have a node at Wolf Ranch and State Highway 29. You also have a node along Williams Drive. You have them throughout our arterial roadways placed at strategic intervals to allow that intensity of commercial development. Then you also have these areas on our map. So an area might be, if you can imagine with me, the area between State Highway 29 South and Leander Road. So if you're standing at Academy and you were looking south, or if you were standing at Popeye's Chicken, you were looking over Wolf Ranch south towards Leander Road, there's an area between State Highway 29 and Leander Road. And those two roadways are important. They kind of bind that area together. Well, these diagrams help us to understand that you want your more intense uses up close to Leander Road or up close to State Highway 29. But in the middle, kind of in the middle of that sandwich, you want your less intense commercial uses or your less dense residential uses. But you don't want to slam a low intensity residential use right up against that commercial use. So just an example of how we apply those as we talk through conceptually with applicants. A good example here in real life was how the intensity of a commercial development and the density of a residential were evaluated last year with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that pink circle in the upper left-hand corner, that's a community center node. So meant to be primarily commercial or non-residential in nature, and it can have that intense activity there. It's at the intersection of State Highway 29 and 130, so vehicular access is prime there. And these commercial centers can also support a secondary use of high density residential. So your MF2 zoning district is appropriate in there in the community center. To its right or to its east is an area identified as yellow, which is our neighborhood future land use. And the neighborhood future land use is meant to support traditional suburban residential development patterns. So your low to moderate density neighborhood. And the request that came in was to place a high density use or your MF2 zoning district within the yellow future land use, which was meant to be that suburban residential development. It would have been more appropriate to place it within the community center. Placing it in the community center node would have allowed for that transition away from the intersection of 130 and 29 East as you transition from that intense commercial node east towards the residential subdivision and ultimately the Eastview High School. Locating the high density residential, locating the high density multifamily in the yellow would not have allowed from that gradual transition from the high density residential down to the low density residential. So here's an opportunity to get your feedback, Commission. What are you thinking as you look at those transition diagrams? Have you had questions about how you transition from an intense commercial node to a less dense residential subdivision? Any questions that have come to mind as you've looked at zoning requests specific to the compatibility of land uses? Are there any, is there any additional information that we can provide to you that would help you as you consider these requests?
Hi, Nat. This is Sheree. I think a lot of us are just kind of processing the feedbacks and the questions that you're asking. I know I read through the annual report, and it would have been great to have some of these questions or feedback that you were seeking up front within that, document. So we would have been, I think, a little bit more prepared to provide you some thoughtful, observations and feedback. So I think a lot of us are just kind of thinking as you're presenting.
That's great. That is absolutely great. And if you allow me to come back, or as you have these opportunities, as thoughts occur to you, Cesar and myself and the rest of the planning staff are available as you have questions come up. Before or after cases, we'd also like to make sure we come back, at different points of the year to visit with you. These tools are meant to work for you. So we just want to keep the conversation going. So your feedback at any time is appropriate. It doesn't have to be tonight.
So Nick,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you possibly send this presentation out?
Absolutely.
Because I do, obviously struggle sometimes when we're looking at the transitions between the land uses to make sure that it's appropriate balanced. And I think like what Kayla had articulated earlier, a lot of us, we're not only looking at the, 2030 comprehensive plan, but also we're looking at a lot of these variances and also within the UDC code. It's like, at what point do you stop, approving variances that go against the 2030 plan? So I think it's a little bit of a struggle for all of us.
Nate, it's Tim Haney. What consideration do you give to the marketplace as far as demand for commercial property and the types of uses of that commercial property? Have you seen any statistics that you could use to to evaluate when a commercial track should come on based on rooftops? Question?
Mr. Haney, excellent point. We, as part of our professional practice, we do see different studies in the marketplace. We know that there are ratios of residential rooftops for siting of commercial properties. We went through that in 2017. We did the retail recruitment study for the city of Georgetown, and we looked at the density of those residential rooftops. And that 2017 study was very eye-opening as we looked at, who are the commercial or retailers that we can recruit to this area based on those densities. And I know there's some Georgetown specific information in there, and there's some regionally specific information in there in terms of what retailers in our region are looking for in terms of those statistics. I know that we're looking to update some of that information there, but if you have any information that you think is at least worth us considering or taking a look at, we would be happy to do that if it's helpful for you in your application of decision making.
It just comes to mind that all of that stuff is driven on rooftops. And if we could see some what ifs and some recommendations on how to evaluate when you have too many rooftops and not enough commercial, I think that would give me a little more information to make a call that we have too many rooftops. Otherwise, I'm pretty much okay with the commercial driving, or not the commercial, but the marketplace driving the need for all these different land uses, unless you've got a better way of doing it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that in terms of the market and its demand. I think what would be helpful and perhaps maybe more thoughtful discussion in a later time with the commission, and I'm happy to come back for an individual topic like this. But how do you balance what you heard in the community, in terms of what the community wants to see? How do you balance and reserve some of the land that may not have that market demand today, but may change in the marketplace 2 to 3 years from now based on development trend? I think that would be a good discussion. Certainly can share with the commission what we looked at in 2017 from the retail recruitment, and share with you a little bit more about what our economic development department is thinking about. And I think it might be even a good opportunity to come back to you and talk about these target areas. In the 2030 plan that we did identify based on that 2017 study and based on the community input, that there are certain areas in Georgetown where that the community would like an emphasis placed on development and redevelopment, and then what are the tools that the city can bring to bear in terms of our infrastructure or our policies. A good example, tonight, the engineering director was on talking about the GTEC, Georgetown Transportation Enhancement Corporation, and $8 million in a roadway project. And the question really on the table was, would that development have happened but for the incentive provided by the city in terms of infrastructure? That I don't have an answer for, but I certainly think maybe a discussion with you and maybe perhaps coming back and sharing some more information on those target areas and how intentional infrastructure may help with some of those marketplace demands, I think might be a good use of our time together if you'd allow me to do that.
I would say utilities are going to drive the ability to develop the property. So that ought to be a consideration when you start targeting property that's real remote with specific or specialized uses. Are you going to be able to drag utilities out there to help make them happen? I think that's another question.
Well, great. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I would like to share with you some of the progress we're making on the utility master plans and how those are related to some of your decisions too in the next slide. If you allow me, I'll share with you, there was some discussion tonight about housing diversity, I think as it related to the Sun City PUD. One of the tools that we have developed as part of the 2030 comprehensive plan and the housing element are the sub-area profiles. So these are geographically the planning area. So that's the city limits plus the ETJ. And we divided them up into 14 sub-areas based on census information, political boundaries like GISD service zones, and some other neighborhood type features. You'll notice that Sun City is in of itself its own sub-area 9. And we took a look at what was on the ground in 2018 in terms of housing. And we have a ton of housing data related to that. Just to give you a snippet of some of the information that is in that housing element, the number of multifamily, or the percent share and number of multifamily units to the percent share or number of single family units. We have the housing types that are also in there. So we have a variety of housing information type. So is it single family attached or single family detached? We even have some market type information to share with you. So want to just offer that we have these sub-area profiles and get your feedback if you think having that type of information would be helpful as you consider zoning requests or rezoning requests as they relate to housing. And if there's additional information that you might have as it relates to the number or types of houses by price point or size that we have in the city, and how that might help you as you evaluate zoning requests for residential uses.
This is Kayla McCord. It's kind of funny, and I'm not sure this is helpful to you, but I think that staff does a really, really good job, the planning staff, relative to promoting diversity, helping us understand where it needs to be, where we lack it. And it is a vision of the city. It's a vision of the majority of residents. We have people moving in every day. And while I have some concerns about the balance of commercial to residential, I think y'all do a great job on that, for what it's worth. I know that's not helpful, but I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that feedback. What I'm hearing you say is that when housing diversity questions are on the table, we have some data points that we can continue to provide that are helpful.
Yes, I think the tools that you have are very good.
Well, I'd like to share with you a little bit more about the second strategic implementation method we have. So we have really 3 strategies to implement the comprehensive plan. I share with you the decision framework, which is how staff supports you and your recommendations to the city council. There's also the regulatory framework, and that really is the backbone of that is the Unified Development Code. We do anticipate a diagnostic coming up this year, and we will keep the Planning and Zoning Commission informed, and in some instances may also engage you for your feedback. And then the third, lastly, strategy we have for implementing the comprehensive plan are our plans, programs, and partnerships. We have been fortunate this year, Susan Watkins, who is our neighborhood, neighborhood development manager, has made significant strides in the partnership with Habitat for Humanity in reaching out and supporting them in their work. She's also been helpful in leading the small area planning effort for the TRG neighborhood, which is west of the downtown. in terms of partnerships with both a neighborhood and a nonprofit. We are undertaking an update to the Parks Master Plan this year, which is effectively a plan that helps us achieve the recreational needs of the city. And this year we also were fortunate to participate in the mobility bond for the city, which goes towards implementing the city's overall transportation plan. We do anticipate an update to the transportation plan in the next coming year or two, and we look forward to working on that. To share with you a little bit further, part of what we heard from the city council and the community is we need a progress report. We need to know how we're doing. So we are tracking the 97 tasks or actions that we have identified between now and 2030. And we are tracking them in a number of ways. We know which goals that they support, and then we know the status of those actions. And just to share with you specifically for goal number 1, we have 20% of our items our actions are in progress. 80% of those actions are remaining. Tracking the status of our actions alone won't give us the fullest picture if we're achieving policy. Policy is really about those decision making that we shared about in the beginning. So one of the measurements we have for evaluating policy and implementation, we're calling a key performance indicator. We have 3 of them for goal number 1. So they are identified as KPI 1A, 1B, and 1C. Because goal number 1 is about the balance of land uses, we are interested in knowing whether or not our professional office and manufacturing uses are locating within our centers. So again, those centers are employment center, community center, and regional center. I mentioned that there's a concentration of those at 130, 35, and Airport Road. And so we want to know, are those certificates of occupancy happening? Are those businesses pulling C of Os within our centers, or are they happening elsewhere outside of those centers? And we'll be tracking this annually. And just to give you a sense of what happened in 2020, about 31% of professional office and manufacturing certificates of occupancy were located in the regional center, and about 14% in the employment center, 2% in the community center. So all in all, about almost 46% were happening within our centers, and 54% was happening outside. Key performance indicator 1B is about the ratio of uses. I mentioned earlier in an earlier slide, we were talking about the individual zoning decisions that you were making recommendations on for the regional center. For the individual cases, we're actually aggregating those changes and looking at what the year-over-year change was to each of the future land uses. It's similar to what you're seeing in those rezoning requests, but we're looking at the city-wide. So annually, we'll be reporting on whether or not all of those zoning changes moved us closer to or farther away from the target ratio for each of our future land use cases. Excuse me, future land use categories. Lastly, for goal number 1, our key performance indicator, the third one, is about the density of new developments that are happening. As Mr. Haney mentioned, the marketplace does drive the development pattern, has a substantial impact what the economy is doing and what the marketplace is doing in terms of what the development pattern is we're seeing on the ground. But we do have a range of densities that we're looking for each of our residential future land uses, and even our commercial future land uses in terms of the density of that development. So we have those ranges. As an example, in the neighborhood future land use category, we're looking at 1 to 5 dwelling units an acre. And we did take a look at those entitlements this year with the subdivision plans and evaluated the density. And for those 3 subdivisions that were approved this year, it appears that we're averaging about 2 units per acre. So we're within those future land use ranges. We'd like your feedback if you have any on the key performance indicators, if there is clarity that's needed for each of those key performance indicators, or if get your general sense of the key performance indicators and if they are effective in helping us understand the progress made towards goal number 1. If you don't have it now, as I shared earlier, be happy to visit with each of you or also find another time to come back and talk and share a little bit more. We will be back annually to share with you what the progress we made in 2021 was. But we do have some next steps that I'd like to share with you. We are going to finalize the report, so we would love your feedback if you have it. We are working to send out that annual report in the coming weeks. So if you have any feedback between now and next week, I'd love to hear from you and talk with you about it. I'll send out the presentation as well as some of these key questions to get your feedback. With my contact information, I can make myself available. But we'll continue to update the 2030 website. We will be unveiling that here shortly, the overhaul for that. And we'll be sending out to those who participated alongside with us in the update over the last 2 years. So a little bit about what we have for the remainder of 2021. I mentioned the UDC diagnostic that we anticipate getting started at the beginning of the next budget year after October. We're going to finalize that public engagement plan. We're also going to continue to support the 2 neighborhoods, TRG and San Jose. Susan is working, and I are working on a neighborhood association pilot with the San Jose neighborhood as part of the small area plan, and continue to support the update to the Parks and Rec plan. Like your feedback, if you have it tonight, on the priorities that you've seen for goal number 1 or any changes to any of the actions that we have planned. Get your feedback on if you have any questions or clarification that's needed before we share the annual report with the City Council, or if there's any constituents or stakeholders out there specifically that you think we need to reach out to share this report with. Mr. Chair, that's the end of my presentation. I know that I will send out the presentation with the questions and my contact information if I can be of help in answering any questions or concerns the commission has.
Thanks, Nat. You know, the only thing I can think of, and I think this goes to Cherie's point, is maybe when we're gonna do these plan updates and discussions on some of the stuff, if we could get the information slightly farther ahead of time. I mean, I don't know if it has to be posted with the agenda or how that works, but I mean, on nights where we've got, you know, we get the email on Friday afternoon that this gets posted, and we've got, I mean, like 50 something items on the consent to go through and legislative items. I just want to make sure that we give, I mean, I know how much time you and your group spends on this, and I want to make sure that I have the available time to review it and give you the feedback that you deserve. And sometimes it's hard when you get 3 days and you've got piles of stuff. So, I mean, I think meeting on a regular basis is probably helpful. Because yeah, I want to make sure that we give you the time you deserve. It's just, we had a big agenda this time.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Excuse me. That's great feedback. I'll send out the PowerPoint presentation and be available and look for another time to come back to talk further with the commission.
Excellent. I think we'd appreciate that. I would certainly appreciate that. Okay. If we don't have anything else, I think, let's see. Sophia, do we have any discussion items this evening?
Just a quick update. The council did make an announcement this last week that we will be moving to in-person meetings again with the opportunity to participate remotely and to allow the community to participate remotely. But there must be a quorum of commissioners in person to have a meeting. So We won't be starting that until July. As you know, we have notices that we have to send out so far in advance that we need to be working on that. But I look forward to sharing some space with you guys and seeing you in person again. Should you be comfortable with that starting in July?
That's the greatest thing I've heard all day. Okay, thanks, Sophia. All right, well, if we don't have anything else, we could entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So we have motion to adjourn, Commissioner Haney. Who has our second?
This is Sheree. I'll second that motion.
Commissioner Heitzman, will you please call the roll?
Sheree Heinzman,
Yes.
Kayla McCord,
Yes.
Tim Haney,
Yes.
Travis Perthews,
Yes.
Doug Noble.
Yes.
Okay, so we have approved, or we have, that motion passes. So it is 8:15 and we are adjourned. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.